This conference will now be recorded.
Hi everyone. So this is Roshan. I'll be taking you through this workshop on microservices, Docker, and containers. Uh, so this is something about me. I have IT. I'm an IT professional with over 14 years of experience. Mostly worked on performance engineering, Java and Python development. On the cloud side, I am architect associate, and I've been automation using Java, Python, PL SQL, shell scripting, and Selenium as well. Currently, I am working as a principal performance engineer and SRE. Okay. So this will be the agenda of our workshop. We'll be taking you to the very basics. Okay. So you don't need to have any prerequisite knowledge to attend this workshop. It's completely from very basics, so don't need to worry, and you can just feel relaxed and just you can we'll take you from very basics. So we'll understand what is this monolithic architecture means, what do we mean by monolithic, and the advantages and the disadvantages of monolithic architecture, monolithic applications. And then once we understand that, we'll understand the microservices. It's a buzzword right now, and every company is trying to migrate to microservices. And we'll understand its characteristics, its advantages, its disadvantages. There are few, but there are. Okay. So after understanding this, we'll do a kind of difference between microservices and monolith. By this time, you'd understand what is monolith and what is microservices. You would completely understand, and then we'll understand where do we run these microservices, because microservices is an application, it's a subset of an application. We'll understand that, but we need to run these microservices somewhere. So we'll understand where do we run this, and in the course of understanding that, we'll touch base on a Docker container, a life cycle. We'll understand on Docker. We'll see how to install Docker, and we'll understand where this Docker fits in. Okay. So, okay, guys. So this will be the agenda. So let's understand. So when I say monolith, okay, monolith means it's a basically it's a three-tier application. Let's take this way. It's a three-tier application. I have a presentation layer, I have an application layer, and I have a data layer. When I say monolith, let's focus on this application layer. So when I say monolith, all your business logic is residing in the same application server layer. This is what we call it monolith. It's a tightly coupled thing. All your modules, like for example, let's say if you have an application, let's say a bookstore app or any app, you can take it. And let's say you have 4 modules. I request everyone to be on mute. Thank you. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can write me in the chat window. Yeah. So let's say you have a bookstore app and you have 4 modules, let's say accounts, shipping, payments, and inventory. You could have many more modules, but I'm just for the simplicity sake, I'm taking 4 modules. So when I say monolith, just focus on this application layer here. So whatever the functions, the code which the developer should be writing for the account for these modules, uh, these functions can be called in anywhere and everywhere. Okay, so there is a high dependency on the code or on the functions that you are writing for each of these modules. Let's say you are writing F1 to F10 code here, F1, F2, F3 functions, and here F11 to F20. So you are free to call the functions while developing the shipping module. You are free to call these functions from accounts module, and you can use it. So the disadvantage here is that even if, let's say, one of the functions fail, F3 having some issues, let's say, your entire application can be at risk. That's the major disadvantages of a monolith application. But when I say monolith application, understand it's a tightly coupled setup where all your business logic, all your modules, and all the business logic, business functions are in the same layer, and the functions which you're writing to get these modules developed are being called anywhere and everywhere. There's a high dependency on the code. Okay, that's what I mean by monolith application. So you must be working in a monolith application where in the application server you'd have you're deploying your entire application in a form of jar file. You would be deploying a jar file or a war file. So once the developer completes writing the code, you have to build the code, and you can build it using jar file or war file. And then when you can deploy in any application server, JBoss, WebLogic, WebSphere, Tomcat, they are like all these code are decided at the same place, same application server, and there is the code is tightly coupled, and they are highly in like dependent. That's what I want you to understand, this monolith application. So what is the advantages? So first of all, yes, it's a we are deploying in one go. So yeah, it's a single unit of deployment, easy to deploy, right? All my code is in the one jar file. I don't need to worry about multiple. I just have one jar file. Whether it's a bug fix or any enhancement the developer team has taken up, or anything. It could be the smallest of the bug fixes or even the large releases. You just have one jar file or a war file, single unit of deployment. That's what you have it. You're not dealing with multiple deployments. So that's the advantages. Good. You have the IDE support. For example, if you are working in a Java application, so you can develop your entire code in Eclipse, or you have the IDE support. Like, so these are the advantages. But on the disadvantages side, those are the advantages. But on the disadvantage side, you have plenty of them. So we'll understand that. It could be often very large. Yes, bigger the application, you have to build the code that big. So it could be often very large. Technology dependency on initial decision. Let's say when you started to work on this bookstore app, you started with the accounts. You always start from single development, right? Let's say you started with this account and you have selected, let's say, Java to develop this particular code, to write the functions. You're writing the Java. Then if when your business ramps up, and let's say when you will think to add much more features like payments, shipping, or inventory, you cannot use any other language but Java. You have to stick to the same initial decision, what you took when you were starting your application. So technology dependency on initial decision. If you are writing your code in Python, you have to write every code in the Python. You cannot change it. You cannot tell I'm going to write this model in Golang or in Node.js. No, it cannot be done in the case of monolith application. And we'll understand that this can be done in microservices. And that is what the difference is here. We are going to make you understand that. It's implemented using a single development stack, as I was mentioning the same thing. Frequent deployments are not practical because the code is so huge. We cannot do a frequent deployment. Like for small bug fixes, let's say for the UI change, something got changed in the UI, or even for the smallest of the bug, it could be anything. You cannot deploy it. You wait for the quarterly release. You must have heard this term, quarterly release. Let's wait for some time. Let's get all the bug fixes in place together, and then we will deploy it. That's what happened in the case of monolith application. You cannot do a frequent deployment. And what is the disadvantages here? Because the customers will get the latest code in delayed, right? It will be delayed for 4 months, 5 months. Then once you roll the new application, then the customer is going to get the new functionality, right? So frequent deployments are not practical. Need to scale the entire application stack. Very disadvantages is this is very important disadvantages. Let's say you just think of one more functionality here. Let's say search. Let's say Flipkart, you're working. So Flipkart, what do you think? If it's a retail application, Flipkart, Walmart, Amazon, whatever. So the most number of use case, what any customers would be access searching, right? We mostly search your application, search for a product. We mostly invoke the search functionality again and again. Let's say if out of 100 transactions, there would be around 75 to 80% of the people who would be searching at one point of time. There would be few people who would be doing an order placement and payments, but the search functionality gets invoked more often than any other functionality. And let's say search is having more hits, right? And I do see let's say I'm doing a performance test and I'm observing, let's say with 1,000 users or 2,000 users, any number of users, let's say 10,000 users, depending on the application. I'm observing that one of the functionality is having a higher response time. Let's say, what can you do about it? One functionality, just search. Every other transaction, every other use case is having a good response time. The SLA is within all the response time is within the SLA, but except this one transaction. What you can do about it? You cannot do anything about it. If it's a resource constraint, it's resource constraint. You may try to optimize the code. That's fine. You have to do it again, if the user hits are so huge that if your application, the infrastructure, the resource configuration is not able to cope up with that, you have to increase the complete application server just because of one functionality. Just think of this, so much wastage of resource, right? Just because of one functionality, one use case, higher response time, I have to increase the complete application server from like let's say if I'm using a 4 V CPU, now I have to go to 6 V CPU or 8 V CPU. I have to increase the CPU or RAM, right, or the heap, whatever. So I have to do at the application server layer. I cannot be specific on the use case level. I cannot do the auto scaling. I cannot scale up the infrastructure only for that use case. That's the greatest disadvantages that you have here, and that we will understand in microservices that it can be done on a particular transaction, for a particular use case. We can scale the resource. We can meet that requirement. We don't have to increase the entire application stack there, application server there, just to have a better response time for one of the transactions. So if you have understood this, right, it's a very important point. If you have understood this, rest of the session is going to be very simple and you're going to enjoy it. So if you have not understood this, please let me know in the chat window. I can repeat it. Okay. So that's the disadvantage, the greatest of it. So to solve this problem, right? So we can come up. We have a microservices. So what we are doing in microservices to solve this problem? Basically, I am trying to break down my entire modules. Now I have 4 modules here. All are tightly coupled: accounts, shipping, payments, inventory, any search, any functionality. Let's add some more functionality. They're all in the same application server, tightly coupled, all together, deployed as a single unit, right? What I'm doing in the microservices, I am splitting it up. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to split it up. I don't want any dependency between these modules. If I'm writing a function F1 to F10 here, I'm not going to call the function in any of my modules. In the shipping module, I'm not going to call that function. If I need the functionality, if I need that particular function, I'm going to rewrite the code, but I'm not going to call that function from the same, from the other module, from accounts module. I'm not going to do that. Basically, in the case of microservices, for the same application, I'm going to break that up into multiple microservices. Now you see as a one application, I'm going to break it up into 4 now. Accounts separate, shipping separate, payment separate, inventory separate, all separate. And I'm going to make them independent. I don't want any dependency. So what will I achieve by that? If let's say inventory fails for some code change or whatever happens, if something inventory change, it is less likely to impact any other functionality. Less likely to impact any other functionality. My application will be still available. That's the greatest advantage. The durability and the reliability. You get the maximum availability also, because for one of the functionality, let's say for one of the modules goes down, you still have the application. Consider like this app, Swiggy, right? You order your food here, or Ola or Uber, you book your cab there. Let's say notification is one of the microservices there. If notification is not working, let's say, does it mean that you cannot book a cab or cannot order a food? Will that be a good good application to work? No, right? If notification is not working, I should be able to still order my food, and I should be still order my cab, right? So that's the microservices. For example, that's what you get. Microservices, you get your maximum availability of your application. Your application will be highly available even if one of the module goes down for any region. That's what you do, because all my microservices are independent, and each of the microservices are used for a particular use case. Accounts will perform some activity, shipping will perform some activity. I'm not saying that they will not interact with each other. They will interact with each other through REST API. I would be exposing few APIs on this account microservices. I'm going to expose some API on the shipping microservices, and these two guys can communicate with each other through REST API calls. But I'm not going to use the function which just hold on to be on mute. Okay. Come on. Okay. So I'm not going to use the function here for of the other modules. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make these two microservices independent of each other, so that even if one fails, my application should not be completely down. I should be able to still perform the other activities, right? That's the main advantage. Now let's go to the definition part. Now, if you have understood this all these things, all will be very simple. Creating smaller and multiple component services which are built to handle a very specific concern. Those are called microservices. To be simply, in a very layman term, just break it up. Same application, just break the same monolith application into microservices. I'm going to tell you how to break it up. It needs good decision making at the top level of organization. How to break it up? You don't want to break into many microservices that it's so difficult to manage all of them. You need to be smart enough to how the way you break your monolith to microservices. A lot of companies are changing their code architecture from monolith to microservices now, and the newer organization, the startups, they're all developing in microservices. The monolith applications is gone now, and it's soon be gonna be out completely. So that's because microservices has a lot to offer on the application availability, durability. That's what customers expect, right? You want your Uber to be always functional. You want your Swiggy to be always operational, right? And how will that be possible? We'll understanding that. So microservice architecture, and there are some other orchestration engine as well, like Kubernetes. We'll talk about that. So that's what the microservices mean. Okay. I hope at this point I would like to just do a cross check. I hope you guys have understood the difference, right, between the monolith and microservices. If anyone has not understood, please let me know. Put your question in the chat window. I can see them. Okay. Okay. So now give some seconds. Okay. Looks like we are doing good. Okay. So coming to the architecture of microservices, how is developed and how it is architected. See, you can in the cloud console. Nowadays we are all working in the cloud. Nowadays we are all working in the cloud, right? So there's something API gateway. Every cloud service provider has this API gateway. I'm going to show you. This is the AWS console I have. If I will just show you, there will be API gateway. Every cloud service provider, not just AWS. This is an AWS management console, by the way. If anyone is new to this, so this is AWS management console. I just logged in. More. Okay, waterfall. Okay, no. See, waterfall is a methodology. Monolith is an application. Okay. Waterfall, if you want to compare with waterfall, you should compare with agile or DevOps. Okay, so both are you are asking to compare between apples and oranges. You cannot compare apple and oranges. You can only compare two apples, right? So monolith is a type of application, monolith architecture or architecture, I would say, application or architecture. Waterfall is a methodology, right? Waterfall, agile, we have DevOps nowadays. That's the methodology. You cannot compare monolith and waterfall. Waterfall is the way we develop it. Waterfall is what do we mean by we develop all at once and then we test it. That is called waterfall. And if we split our development activity into a lot of phases, sprints, we call those things as agile, right? Agile methodology, right? And then DevOps, currently we're in the DevOps world. So that's what monolith is, an application where all the components of and the modules are tightly coupled. This is monolith, and you can compare monolith with SOA or microservices, not monolith and waterfall. I hope you understood this, Mohammed. If not, please ping me. Okay, I'm going to take that at the end of the session. So this is the AWS console. If anyone is new to this, I have just provisioned one EC2 instance here, and with every cloud service provider, whether it's AWS or Azure or GCP, we have this service called API Gateway. API Gateway, what it does, API Gateway is used to build the APIs. You can build the API. So whatever I'm showing here in this architecture, that's the API Gateway here. Client is doing some requesting, just hitting some API, okay? Hitting some API, and API has been developed using API Gateway, and that's what I'm showing here. Container orchestration, we have different container orchestration engine. Container orchestration is Kubernetes is the most popular of the container orchestration, but you should focus here. You have microservices, different microservices, and you should focus here. First microservices 1 is developed in Java. Microservices 2 is developed in Python. Microservices 3 can be developed in Go. And this microservices 2 is interacting with NoSQL databases like DynamoDB, MongoDB, Cassandra. Here and this guy, microservices 3 can interact with the SQL databases, MySQL, Oracle, Postgre, anything. So the idea is focus here that the microservices can be developed in different languages because it is an independent unit. That's what the definition is. The victory is in the definition. That's what it makes it. That's why people are so interested in developing microservices, because if they can develop one microservices in one language, let's say tomorrow if they want to ramp up the business, they come up with a new module and they can develop in another microservices in another language, and then they can export some API, and then these two microservices can interact with through some REST API calls if there is need to interaction. That's what microservice architecture looks like. These two words should come to your mind when you hear microservices. So you should come like it's a subset of your application, a subset of a bigger application, okay? And it's an autonomous. It is autonomous, and it is used for a specialized purpose. It is there. This microservices is used for a specialized purpose. So these two words should come whenever you hear this word microservices: autonomous and specialized. And it is a subset of a bigger application, because it could be one of the modules, or you can club two modules and make it as a one microservices. That depends on you and your organization, how they are thinking to create, divide their monolith to microservices, or if they're starting from very scratch. Nowadays, all the startups, without any exception, they are working in microservices, and rightly so, because the advantage, they get so much of advantage. Everyone is talking about high availability, high reliability. Everyone wants the application to be highly available. You will not like if Google Gmail will be shut down, or Google will be down, or recently Facebook got down. You don't like these things, right? So that is why microservices are so important, because they offer a lot of advantages what monolith application cannot. So you can clearly see this: accounts, shipping, payments, inventory, they are independent unit. Accounts is one microservices, payment is another microservices, shipping is another microservices, inventory is another microservices. All microservices are interacting with each other through REST API, lightweight REST API, and they are used for a dedicated autonomous specialized purpose. The advantages, it has huge number of advantages. Okay, flexible scaling, as I was mentioning, right? Remember that if one of the transactions is having a higher response time and others are under the SLA, for one you don't want to increase the entire application server, right? That's not a good thing. In microservices you can do that. You can specifically do the scaling of one particular transaction because you have split it, right? You have split these things. Now these things are independent and separate, so you can deploy this in some higher configuration resource server, right? With having the more CPU, more RAM, you can deploy this particular account or search which needs higher resource. You can deploy these in those where you have a high resource, high number of vCPU, high number of RAM. You can deploy this, so you can do flexible scaling. That's the greatest advantages, and that's what makes it, because you, end of the day, you are saving resource. You are, these microservices help you reduce the resource consumption. That's what you need, right? You don't want to pay more in resources, don't want to pay more in the servers, don't want to pay more on the hardware, right? If you can perform the same activity in a lesser hardware, it's a win-win situation, and it is giving you high availability also. Your application is less likely to go down. You are consuming less resource. You're gonna just scale it for one particular microservices. That's all. For remaining four, they can be deployed in a same normal server. So it all depends. You can do flexible scaling, easy deployment, because you have split it, right? You have, all things are independent now, separate. So it's easy to deploy now, very easy to deploy. Independently, you can deploy them. Technological freedom, as I was mentioning, one microservices can be developed in one technology, other microservices can be developed in another technology. That's what you do it. Reusable code, right? So within the microservices, you can still reuse the code. So whatever the function I'm writing here, let's say F1 to F10, whatever the function, I can reuse the functions within the microservices. I cannot use outside this. That's a disadvantages. I may have to rewrite few code. That's fine, but it is offering you a lot of advantages, right? But within the microservices, you are free to reuse the same code. Let's say if I'm writing an F11 and if I need to call F1, I can do that. I can call F1 from F11 function. I can do that. So I can reuse the code, and this is the greatest of all, resilience. Your application will be highly resilient, less likely to go down, less likely, because everything is independent. Even if, let's say, inventory is down or inventory is not working for some region, you have other modules which can be working, right? And your application is still available. That's the advantages. So there are more advantages than disadvantages. There are few disadvantages. It's not like it's free of disadvantages, but there are few of them, and it can be managed also if you plan it accordingly. So coming to the first disadvantages here, the spawning, as I was mentioning, right? So you don't want to break your monolith application into many more multiple microservices where it's become difficult to handle. You don't want to do that. So spawning means too many microservices. You want to be smart enough, intelligent enough to break your monolith application so that it doesn't become a problem for you to manage all of them. So you can still manage it. Spawning means if you have too many microservices, it sometimes it becomes difficult to manage all of them. So spawning is one of the disadvantages, but you can manage. Duplicate code, yes, because I'm trying to make two modules independent. I cannot call the functions, because if I call the function, they will be dependent. I don't want to do that. So you may end up writing the duplicate code, the same code. You may end up writing the same code for this module, right? But again, you can decide if you, let's say, you are this code, whatever function f1 to f10 or f11 to f20, this is f1 to f10. If you have to write the same code more than 60% or 50%, what you can do, you can club these two and make it as a one microservices. It all depends on you. It is highly configured, because it's you who are deciding how many microservices you want to break your monolith application. It is you have to take a call. If you are splitting your monolith into two, let's say count and shipping, and you observed that there are more duplicate code, more than 60%, and you have to rewrite the code again, it's a waste. It's not a good thing to have that level of duplicacy. If you have that level of duplicate code, it's better to merge these two microservices, accounts and shipping, and call it as a one microservices. You just have, because it's just a matter of few more lines of code, few functions, and these two microservices can be clubbed together. So that is what I'm telling, that you should be smart enough to decide that how many microservices you would require to split your application. Am I making sense to you guys? Can I get a quick acknowledgement on the chat window? Yes, no, confused, whatever. I'm gonna take some time because I want you to understand this properly. Can I get a quick acknowledgement? Yes, no. You guys are following me. I just want everyone to respond. Yeah. Okay, good to know that I have got more number of yeses, so I can feel relaxed. Okay, good. So you can reuse the code. You may have to duplicate the code, but you should be smart enough. Okay, I've got a question. How integrity of data is maintained, because we are using two different set of code. Infra for same shipping functionality. Microservices is just an API, okay? Not a subset of a bigger application, okay, Mohammed? Subset of a bigger application. So earlier, as I was mentioning you, that I have one, you have application, you have 4 modules in the application. So what I did, I just broke all these modules, make them independent, and I just call them as microservices. So it's not a subset of API, it's an API. It could be an API, or it could be user interface. It could be anything, okay? It depends on your development. It could be an API, or it could be a UI, but it's not a subset of API. It's a subset of your bigger application. One part of your bigger application. That's the microservices. Okay. Okay. So resilience, as I was mentioning, very important, and network performance. So once you deploy, okay, once you deploy your microservices, you need to be cognizant enough that you should understand the two microservices are not far from each other, because if they need to interact with each other through exposed API, through exposed REST APIs, there should not be delay. Okay. So network performance is very important, because when you deploy it, you deploy in the EC2 instances, multiple EC2 instances in multiple data centers spread across the globe. But you should be mindful that when you deploy your microservices, that you deploy it in that way that you don't become a bottleneck. You don't get a latency. It doesn't create a latency between the microservices interaction. So again, this could be a problem, network performance, but it could be worked out. If you deploy your microservices carefully. So these are the disadvantages, but these disadvantages are like you can work on this. It's not like it cannot be fixed, or it cannot be reduced, it cannot be managed. Okay, so there are disadvantages, but you can work through them and you can make it a success for all your microservices that you have in your organization. So now, as we have understood the monolith and microservices both, so we can easily we can just do a difference between these two. Processes are tightly coupled here. Yes, one service per process. That's perfectly fine. Adding features become more complex. Yes, you have to build the entire code every time. Here, adding feature is a very simple task because each service performs one simple task. You just need to add one more microservices. That's all it takes. Add risk for application availability. That's the greatest disadvantages of monolith, because even if one of the functions, for smallest of the functions, is not working, it can break the entire code, because the code is being used everywhere and anywhere with across all the modules because it's tightly coupled. Here it is not that case. If there is a problem, it will just impact one microservices. And we're going to also understand that even if you have a problem, you can create multiple pods. When you talk about container orchestration engine like Kubernetes, even if one of the pods where you will deploy your microservices is down, you can create another pod. So you will understand once you understand the Kubernetes architecture, you will understand that it's so resilient. In microservices architecture are very much resilient, less likely to be down. So these are the differences between the monolith and microservices. So that was the first part of the workshop. I hope everyone understood till this point. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop me something in the chat window. Okay. So the next question, where do we run these microservices? Okay, I have talked about that microservices, monolith. I've been talking about from half an hour. Good that everyone understood, but where do we run this? We have three options, right? Either we can run directly on the physical server, directly on the bigger box physical server, or what we can do, we can virtualize this. We can run on the VMs, like the way we do right now. If it's a 3-tier application, we use one VM for app server, one VM for web server, one for database server. That's what we do right now. It's 3-tier application. We can run on the VMs, or we can run them on the containers. There is one more word, buzzword, containerization. This was virtualization, where you created the virtual machines. Now we are in the phase of containerization, where in the same where in the one VM we can create multiple containers. So basically, we run microservices on the containers because we get the advantages, a lot of advantages of virtual servers, which have been proven in time through time, right? We have been using virtual servers from quite some time, 20 to 30 years. We are using and its production scale, it's all good security wise. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna run the microservices in the container. We'll understand how do we create container. First, we need to create the container, and but we will host these containers on the VMs because we want to use the advantages of VMs also. So we're gonna create the VM. Yeah, yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is. I'm telling you, right? So that is called VM, and you can create containers there. That's the containers. So we're gonna create containers on the VM. So what I showed you here, I have provisioned one VM. So I went to the EC2. This is the AWS console, and if you need a virtual machine, you need to come to this service called EC2 here, Elastic Compute Cloud. That's the AWS service to provision servers. If you're working in Azure, you can go to virtual machines. Okay. If you're working in Azure, so if you're working in Azure, you can go to the virtual machine and create a VM. I'm going to just show you quickly how it looks. This is the Azure portal. You can come to this virtual machine and you can create a VM. If you are in GCP, the term changes. Okay, that term. If you're in GCP, you have to use compute. Just the term changes, but everywhere you can provision the server. So you have to use the compute. Okay, so you can create a project and you can just create a compute and you can just work on this. You come to compute and you can create a VM. I'm gonna show you. You just search. Okay, compute. It will also tell you. So you can create a compute engine here. So you can basically provision a server. So these are the three basic, the most popular cloud engines, cloud services, AWS, Azure, and GCP. I'm going to provision one EC2 instance, the server in the EC2 in AWS. So I have also created a VM. This is a VM, okay, by the way. It is a VM. The hypervisor, the physical server, which I was talking about, we cannot, they have virtualized it, okay. They have installed a virtualization software and we can create a VM. So this is what you see. It's VM and I have logged into this VM. This is my VM, okay. So you can just see who am I. I'll be a root user. So this is my VM. Okay, you can see this. This is the private IP 172.31.17.55. If I do, so this is the private IP. You can see this. This is the same private IP I'm using. 172.31.17.55. So it's the same machine I have logged. So this is a VM. What we're gonna do? So we can create containers here in the VM. We want to use all the merits, all the good things of a VM, and we're going to create containers on VMs, and there and then the microservices can be run in the containers. That's how it is. So yeah, someone was asking the difference. So that's the difference here. You can see this. So this is the VM I'm showing here. So this is a VM1, this is a VM2, VM3. So I have an infrastructure here. The AWS guys have, or any cloud service provider, when you create a launch instance, you create a VM, and they already have a bigger infrastructure physical server, and they have already virtualized this by installing some hypervisor software. Okay, hypervisor is a virtualization software itself. It could be from VMware or VirtualBox. There are so many virtualization software you can use. They use VMware virtualization software, AWS guys. And once you have it, you can create VM. So I have also created a VM. This is a VM, and I have used Ubuntu as the operating system. Ubuntu. I hope you know Ubuntu. It's a Debian flavor, Linux flavor. So you can have a guest operating system. So I'm using an Ubuntu here. Then I'm using it has the binary and library. And if I need, I can install my application. Basically, the way we do a three-tier application, right? So app server, web server, database server. So we can have three VMs. We need to have three VMs if it's a three-tier application. But what I'm going to tell you today, that in one VM itself, this is a one VM. In one VM itself, this is my one VM. I'm going to create multiple containers. Container A, container B, container C. So this is my VM. I have a host operating system, which is Ubuntu. I'm going to install a container engine. Container engine. Okay? Remember this word, container engine. That container engine happens to be Docker. There are other container engines as well in the market, like Rocket. We have Podman. We have uh, we have so many container engine. Docker is the most popular container engine. To create containers in the VM, you need to install a container engine. Once you install the container engine, you can create containers. Container A, container B, container C. You can create any number of containers depending on the resource that is there with your VM. Currently, if you look at how many resources I have just one vCPU. If you look at number of threads that I have, it is just one vCPU. Look at the threads I have, only one vCPU. CPU is only one. Threads per core is one, and I have only one vCPU. And how much RAM I have? Only one GB of RAM. That's all I have. If I just show you, I'm just having one GB of RAM, nothing else. So one vCPU, 1 GB RAM, minimum you can get it. That's what it is. But in this also, I can create multiple containers. Basically, what I'm telling that earlier, I needed 3 VMs to create a 3-tier application. One for app server, one for web server, one for database server. Now, in only one VM itself, I can have 3 containers. One for app server, one for web server, and one for database server. And I can have my application running. It may not scale that much, that is understood, but I'll be able to properly utilize the resource. That is for sure. And that is what the intention is. I don't want this VM to be underutilized or this VM to be underutilized. I don't want this VM to be underutilized. I want these VMs to be fully utilized. And that is why I'm creating containers on my VM. Once I'm done utilizing my VM by creating containers, I'm going to create another VM and I'm going to create another container, same containers there if I need to ramp up. The idea of containerization is to utilize the resource better. I should be able to utilize the resource better. I don't want to pay unnecessary on the resource. I don't want my resource to go waste. And that was the intention from very beginning, right? Why this virtualization came, earlier back in wherever the software development started back in 1980s or 1975, people used to use one physical server and they used to deploy one tiny application, few MB, few KB application, and they used to waste a lot of resources. That is what virtualization helped them to utilize the resource better. Someone thought that why are we wasting so much of resource? Let's break this physical server into multiple VMs, and then I can deploy the same application on each of the VMs so that I can deploy more application in the same infrastructure. So virtualization, the idea of virtualization was to efficiently utilize the resource. Now we are into containerization phase, and the idea is the same. Idea is to utilize the resource better. That is still the same advantage. The idea is the intention, the goal is the same. I want my VM to be fully utilized, and then if I need, I'm going to create another VM and I'm going to create containers on top of that. But I want to make sure that I am utilizing my VM completely to its full potential. Then only I'm going to create another VM. That's the idea of containerization. The idea has always been to utilize the resource better. That has always been this idea. And that is why you can create containers. And the best part is, when you notice the best part, I can have 3 containers, container A, container B, container C, but I don't need 3 operating systems separate. Here, I needed 3 operating systems. I'm saving so much. I'm gonna use the binaries and libraries of the host operating system. Only thing is that it works perfectly well with Linux. If you have Linux infrastructure, you can create operating system, Linux operating system only, and then you can create containers. You cannot have Windows, because when Windows has a lot of this licensing thing and all, it doesn't work that well with containers. So it all works with Linux. So the idea is to utilize the resource better. And what the way we're gonna do this by installing the container engine like Docker. So this is my operating. This is my VM. Currently, this is my VM. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to install Docker. If I just check, I don't have Docker installed. I don't have Docker installed. They are suggesting me that I can run this and I can install this. I can do this right away. Okay, but there are other ways to install Docker. I'm not going to use this way. I'm going to use much good way of installing Docker. I can, but this will not give you the latest and the greatest of Docker install, but this will install Docker for sure. Okay, you can directly run this and it will work. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just hold on. Curl this. Okay, I can directly install Docker by doing this. Okay, I have to install Docker. I perfectly fine. It will install Docker without any problem. Okay, let me do this way. I'm going to talk to you about the other way some other time. Okay, so let me just do this way. I have to install Docker IO. Nothing to be done. Just click on UI. Yes, I want to go ahead with installation. It will install Docker container engine. Basically, container engine. I'm installing a container engine. Once I do that, I can create containers. The idea is here. In the case of virtualization, okay, in the case of virtual servers, when you were creating virtual VMs, right, you were virtualizing the infrastructure. In the case of virtualization, you were virtualizing the infrastructure. But in the case of containerization, you are virtualizing the host operating system because you don't need operating system separately. You're going to use the binaries and libraries of the host operating system only to create containers. I'm going to show you, okay? Don't worry. I'm going to show you by creating containers, how to create containers on the VM. So I hope I'm done with my installation. Let me check it. It's going to take some time. Basically, I'm installing a container engine. You can install some other container engine as well, like Rocket, Containerd, Podman, any container engine you can install. But Docker happens to be the most popular one. If I do Docker version now, you can see this. I have Docker installed now. Client Docker is having both client and the server. That's how it works. So I have Docker installed now. Okay, and then how can we create containers? So I'm going to talk about that. How do we create containers? But the the advantage of containers is that the containers virtualize the host operating system because you don't need separate operating system for my containers. I can run my app server here, web server here, database here. What a question here. No, we do on the VMs. There is a region and mole, okay? Because VMs are proven over time. VMs are having a lot of security. You cannot compromise that. You don't want to compromise that. VMs are a lot more secure than directly creating the containers on the physical servers. You don't want to do that. We should always create containers on the VMs for the security purpose because VMs we have been using from quite some time and they have proved very well for us in production. It is secure. It has a lot of advantages to take VMs. So you can see this is mature and secure. VMs have these two features. You don't want to miss these features. And that is why we create containers on the VMs, not on the physical servers. Very good question, Anmol. But we're going to create containers on the VMs. And containers don't replace VMs. Remember this. VM virtualizes. Here I'm showing you VMs. Okay, VM1, VM2, VM3. Here I have used VMware as the hypervisor virtualization software. This is my physical server. I have used one virtualization software of VMware. Then I can create VM1, VM2, VM3. Here, in the case of VMs virtualize the hardware, the physical server. But in the case of containers virtualize the host operating system. That's very important to understand. If you have understood this, this 1.5 hours is worth. Okay, if you have understood the difference between microservices and monolith, and it's and if you have understood the difference between VMs and containers, and the VMs virtualizes the hardware, but the containers virtualize the host operating system, because you don't need separate operating system for your containers. That is why they are so lightweight. They are so lightweight. They have a lot of advantages. It boots up in seconds. I'm going to show you how it runs. Okay, it will boot up in seconds. Very lightweight containers, and it takes fractions of disk and memory. We're going to find that out. So containers have a lot of advantages. Okay, Mohammed, you're going to get the recording, so don't worry. You can go over the recordings. Containers, so there are a lot of advantages: portability, resource efficiency, yes, isolation, speed, and scaling. There are a lot of advantages of containers. I'm going to directly use this time to create, I'm going to show you how to create containers. So this is the Docker container lifecycle. So what we do, we have something called hub.docker.com. Okay. It's something called hub.docker.com. Let me just so there's something where you can have images. So microservices can be run through images. Okay, we have images, Docker images. We call it container images. Once we run these images, remember this diagram. So we have container engine, Docker engine. We have installed that. We have seen this, that we have engine and the client both installed. What we do, we have a how Docker Hub. Here, like I was just showing you this website, right? So here you can find the images, the container images for a lot of applications. Like if you want, or let's say HTTPD. HTTPD is a web server. It's a web server. So you can use this image to create a HTTP microservice container. So when you create the container, basically you are creating a microservices. You're hosting the microservices. I'm going to show you how to create the container, but we create through images. So we get the images from Docker Hub, as I was showing. So this is an image of the HTTPD web server. I can download this image, and I can, when I run this, it becomes a container. Similarly, it is a web server, but let's say if I'm using a Tomcat as my application server, so I can use this Tomcat. These are all official images. Okay, you can have your own images, but these images have been uploaded to Docker Hub from the company itself, from Tomcat itself. You want to use MySQL, yeah, database also, it's there. You can use MySQL container. So I've stored you app server, I've showed you web server, I've showed you database server. You can have MongoDB as well. MongoDB image, you can have it. If some folks here from performance testing, you can have JMeter image also. You can install JMeter. You can use this. You can create a container for JMeter. You can run the JMeter. You can install JMeter as a container. So basically, you download this, and then you get the images. There are commands, Docker commands. We have it. We're gonna use those commands, and we're gonna run. Once we run those images, it becomes containers. So I'm gonna show you. Okay, I'm gonna install a web server. Let's say. So to install a web server, as I was showing you, HTTPD, it's a web server. It's a Apache web server. Like how we have for Windows IIS, right? Same thing. It is for the use it. So to download this, I can directly use this Docker pull HTTPD. If you don't install Docker, it's not going to work. So you need to install Docker first, and then you can pull this. What it will do, it will download the image. It is downloading the image. directly from the hub.docker.com. Just now it did. If I just do Docker images, you can see this. So this is called the image HTTPD. Perfect. Now, if I want to install this, how can I run this? So Docker PS, by typing Docker PS, you get to see how many containers are running. Currently, there is no containers. So what I can do, I can run this. Docker run command is there to run the container, to run the image to create a container. So Docker run, do -it, IT is for the interactive mode, -d means daemon mode. You would like to run as a daemon mode. You can do a port mapping because it's a web server. You have to do a port mapping. 82 port of the host. Web server always runs on port 80. HTTPD runs on port 80. You have to do this, and then image name. So this is a standard thing. Okay, it's a way we write this. Docker run interactive mode, run as a daemon mode, port mapping 82 port. I'm going to use this port 82 to show you that there is a web page. I'm going to first run this. So I'm going to run this. When I run this, so much time it took, just fraction, right? Now if you took a Docker PS, we have created a container, web server is up and running in this VM on port 82. You don't believe it? I'm going to show you. So first of all, I need to open the port. In cloud is always secure. So I need to open the port 82. Without opening port 82, it will not work. So let me first open the port 82. I have just opened port 22 because I wanted to SSH. Only port 22 is open here. I'm gonna open port 82 as well because if I do not open it, it's not going to work. I'm going to go to the security group and I can edit this inbound rules and I can add a port 82 port, custom TCP port, yeah, 82 port. Here I can mention everyone to it. Here it means everyone, all the people in the world can access this. I can restrict this also. I can just mention my public IP here. Only I can access this. But let me just make it available for everyone. Even you guys can see this. I'm going to save it. Now I'm going to use this. I have used this EC2 instance. I'm going to take the public IP of this EC2 instance. This is the public IP, this is the public IP, this is the private IP, this is the public IP. I'm going to take this public IP. I'm going to show you that web server is running. This is the public IP on port 82. This is the actual web server, web page. You guys can see this. It is not just for my laptop. Everyone can access this. Okay? Just try it. So I have just hosted a web server. This thing is coming from a index.html file. Can anyone confirm that you guys can access this page? Yes, quickly. Can anyone confirm that? Yeah, thank you. So it works. Okay, so it's coming from an index.html file. Where is this index.html file? It is hosted in this container. I can go inside this from the VM. I can go inside the container by using docker exec command. And give my container ID and I can give my bin bash. Can you notice something got changed here? I was in the VM. Now you see I'm in the container. I'm in this location. Where am I? I'm in this location. If I do an ls-l, this is where my index.html file is located. If I just show you this index.html file, this it works is coming from here. If I change this index.html file to my index.html file, it will display the same thing. So you can make this page the way you want. So this is the web server. I'm running web server as a container. I can exit this. I'm again back to my VM. Now, how many container I have right now? Only one container. I can run MySQL. I can run Tomcat. I can run Mongo database, anything. I can perform any activity here. I can use MySQL, one database if I need, perfectly, you can get it. Just use MySQL database or Mongo database, whatever you need. So, MySQL. Very simple command, official image. Take this, you can download by this. And while running the database, you need to open few ports and then you can find the where you want to run this. You can just see this. You should give some username, password, use the database. Once you run this, it is going to create a database container for you. I can have Jenkins also. I can install Jenkins. Whatever, anything basically. There are a lot of containers. The idea is that you're gonna create a development team, gonna create images for you. A DevOps engineer can also create image through Docker file, but once you have the image, you can run your image and create containers. The idea is this: you can use Jenkins here. You can pull Jenkins here. You can run Jenkins here. Docker run. Once you run this, it's gonna create. You're gonna run Jenkins on port 8080. Jenkins runs on port 8080. You can just do that. I can simply run this guy. Docker pull Jenkins. You can just pull it. Once you do that, what Docker latest not found. Okay, that's fine. You can install some other tag, view available tags. Let me check it, some other tag. So you can use some latest is not available. So you can some other tags as well. You can use this guy 60.3. It will work. So you're downloading the Jenkins image. Once you have the image, you can, it's real time, guys. Okay, it's Jenkins. I'm installing Jenkins right now. It is downloading right now. It's downloading the image right now. It will not take long. So this Jenkins is installed. Jenkins this tag version. If I do Docker images, you can see the images I have. I have Jenkins now. It has taken around a lot of space. 696 MB it has taken. I can run this guy and it will. I can run this guy and it will become a container. Run this. It's just command you have given. You're seeing this. Okay. Basically, that's how you do it. You can create, once you have your microservices in the form of image, you can simply run this and it will work just fine. You can run this Jenkins. Running on port 8080, and this guy is creating a volume also. There's a volume which is creating. Run this guy. It is getting some problem. That's fine. So this, that's fine. Okay. Latest is not there. You have to give the right tag name which you have used basically. Only to work. If you do not give anything, it will take latest, as you can see this. But if you give specifically, it's going to work. Wrong volume permission. So you can create a volume also first, using a volume. So first of all, you need to create a volume. I'm going to talk about that later. If you do a Docker volume ls, there is no volume. Okay. So there is no volume. You can create a volume, Docker volume, create volume, and then you can use this. It will work. So basically, you can create containers like this. So similarly, you can install some other operating system also. not just softwares, but let's say I want to install Fedora. Let's say Fedora is another operating system. I can use Fedora. Again, from the official image, it's an operating system. I can install Fedora as a container, and I can go inside and I can install Java there or whatever. I can do that. So to do that, I can simply do Docker pull of this guy. It's going to download Fedora. It's going to, after downloading, I can run it and I can go inside this. So to do Docker images, you can see this. There are downloaded image 178 MB. I can run this guy here. Docker run -it -d. There's no port mapping required here because it's going to simply run it. So if I do Docker ps, just now it has created. I can go inside this. I can go inside this like Docker exec -it and container ID binbash. I can go inside this Fedora container. I'm inside the Fedora container. Okay, you can see this. I can type Fedora is a CentOS, right? So it will not work. The yum update, apt update will not work. So yum update will work. Yum update -y. I can simply update the packages there. So, and then I can commit this image. So basically, I can perform a lot of activities. I just showed you how can I create the images. The idea is to, and it will just take some time and it will update all the packages. I can, after updating, I can save this. I can save the updated container as a new image. Okay. I can commit this so that whenever I use next time, I can create the updated container next time. Can we create multiple containers from same image? Yeah, you can create it, but what is the point? You can create it. Yes, you can create it, but always make sure if it's a web server, you are hosting in some other application, some other port. You are doing a port mapping correctly because you're not interfering the same port 82. So now, as I can see, it's updated. So what I can do, I can come out and I want to save this. Let's say this image, this container, I've updated the operating system here. I can install anything Java, I can install my application, whatever I need. After installing everything, I can commit this. So Docker commit container ID. I can give this is my container ID. And I can give new image name, let's say Fedora new, whatever, updated _ new. So I'm just taking a saving this as a new image. See, if I do a Docker images, I'm gonna get four images now. See, Fedora new has also come. See the size here. How much thing it got downloaded? When I downloaded the image, it was just 178 MB. And I updated all the packages. I just updated, like how do you do Windows update? I just did that app update. And look at the size here. So many things it got downloaded. And next time if I need, I can use this image to create a container. So basically, these are like, this is how you create containers. And if it's if your application a specific API container, you need to know your container and you can create it this way. But this is not we do it. This is how we start it. Okay. But there are some Docker compose. We do it. Let's say multiple. You don't do container creation one by one. Okay. We don't do that. How we do it, we do in chunk, right? Let's say app server, web server, database server, everything in one YAML file. And using Docker Compose, I can execute Docker Compose and I can run all at once. I can create volume also. Earlier, I was not able to run the Jenkins because it needed the volume, right? I can come out, exit here. Okay, I have already done that. So I can create a volume right now. You don't have any volume here. So in the idea is to give all the detail in the same YAML file, and using Docker Compose, I can create multiple containers at once. That's about Docker, but there's something called container orchestration engine as well. So let's say if you have multiple containers, how do you manage it? So you need an orchestration engine because sometimes you need to load balance, right? Load balance the traffic coming across all the containers. You have to auto scale it. Or you what do you let's say you have 4 containers right now, and all of a sudden load increased. How would you make sure that your servers, your containers get auto scaled, right? So that it can serve to those additional requests because of the high load. So for that you need container orchestration engine like Kubernetes. So that's how you go on, but that's how you start with microservices. So this was a brief session uh, on microservices, monolith. How do we create containers? So that if you have any questions, guys, feel free to ask. That's all I wanted to cover today. Yeah. And if you looking for a full-fledged detail, the way, so I'm coming up with a course with ESA Training Solutions. You can go over this link and you can find. I'm coming up with a course. This demo will be on this coming Tuesday. So for participants in India, it's 7:30 a.m. and for participants in US, it's 10 p.m. For 1 hour every day, weekdays, Monday to Friday. And if you look at the course syllabus, this is the course syllabus. I'm going to talk about the cloud computing. If anyone is new to the cloud, I'm going to talk about that first. I'm going to make you comfortable, AWS. Then Linux command line. If someone is new to the Linux command line, the way I performed some activity or did some activity. So if anyone is new, so this is for them. The idea is to get as comfortable with Linux as you are with Windows. Then I'm going to talk about more in detail about monolith application, microservices, more in detail about the container engine. I just given you the basic idea about the container engine, but there are a lot more things. And then the very important of all, a container orchestration engine, Kubernetes. And last but not the least is your DevOps, how it works. Someone was getting confused between the monolith and so it's the DevOps. Okay, yeah, I can paste this link. You can go over this link and you can join me on a demo session on Tuesday, this Tuesday. We can meet and discuss more about this. Yeah, guys, now it's your time. If you have any questions for me, feel free to ask. It's your time now. So I have got a question from Prajna. See, Prajna, the microservices performance testing, it is not different. Idea is earlier you used to get one URL and it was interacting with every functionality that you had. Now for each of the microservices, you're gonna test it separately. You're gonna have a REST API mostly. You're gonna create REST APIs. Let's say if you're doing a JMeter, you have to script in JMeter all your microservices, your API. You can configure it and test it because microservices is for the specialized purpose. In one application earlier, if you were having one URL, now depending on the number of microservices you have in your application, you have to test that many microservices, and you can test it in all at once. So only thing is that the URL, the REST API call would change, but the testing point of view, the concept is going to be the same: response time, throughput, SLA. It's all that what you need to take care of it, and you need to tune it. Yeah. Thank you, Kamlesh. I hope you guys have learned something today. I just wanted to make this 1.5 hours worth for everyone. So I hope I was able to do that. Feel free, guys, to ask me questions. We have some 9 minutes left. Feel free. So if you install Jenkins on EC2 instance, would you need to install it on the container again? See, it all depends on you, Jay. How do you want to install? I can install Jenkins directly here. I can install Jenkins directly on the VM. You know, I need Java, right? For first thing, I would need Java to install here. Then I can install Jenkins, right? So that's how it works if directly on the VM. But if you are running Jenkins as a container, in the image itself, they will have Java, they would make sure Java is there. So it depends on you, how do you want to install it? So either you can install directly on the VM or as a container. It depends on you. You can install both ways. No, I just need to install it once, right? Either on the VM or in the container. And why do I need? Uh, See, OpenShift is a container orchestration engine, Pete. So like Kubernetes, we have container orchestration engine. So OpenShift is a licensed container orchestration engine. Kubernetes is the open source. So basically, both are same container orchestration engine. See, remember two words: container engine and container orchestration engine. There are difference. Container engine means like Docker. Container engines helps you create containers, but container orchestration engine helps you manage containers. If you want to do load balancing, auto scaling, deployment, a lot more features will come with container orchestration engine. And OpenShift happens to be the licensed version of container engine. Yeah. See, correct. Very good question, Hari Krishna. See, currently, if I look at, I have how many containers? Two containers running, right? If I want to see the stats, I can type Docker stats. I can see the footprint of my containers, how much they are taking. Currently, I'm not running web server. This is my one is my web server and another is my simple Fedora image, right? So if I do a load testing on my web server, if everyone hits the URL that I have it's gonna suit up. So Docker stats is the command which will help you see. For VM, containers are like process. Like this is a Windows VM, right? I have opened GoToMeeting. I have opened some different browser here, Microsoft Edge. I have opened OneNote. I have used Putty. I have used Chrome. So these are all the processes for my Windows operating system. For VM, for where containers are running, containers are nothing but the processes. So that's how it is. So you need to monitor these things, very important metrics to understand that. And you need to also you need to take care of the infrastructure utilization, how much you are using. If you do a top, you can see this, I'm not using much resource here. It's all looks like all good, right? See, and if you look at the load average, it's all good, very stable currently, because nothing is running right now. So infrastructure metric as well as the container metrics, both are important. Sai has asked a question, what should be our focus in performance testing? Uh, um, what should be our focus in performance testing? The microservices around containers? Can you? Correct. See, performance, see, microservices run on containers. Okay, it's a fact. Now you need to understand the resource wherever you have deployed your microservices containers. Is it able to can accommodate that much of load? That's the question, right? Currently, I have, let's say, these two microservices running. how much users can they handle, can they serve. I can only find if I do a load test on them and using Docker stats. I need to understand if I run 100 user test. Let's say this is my web server. If I'm doing a this is my web server, Jealous, whatever, any name I can rename this. If I do 100 user test, if I need to understand, can this guy accommodate 100 users? I need to check that, or how many users it can accommodate, 100 users, 200 users. So I need to understand what is the breaking point, right? So that's how we test it. That's how we test it. And if we need, we will set up a Kubernetes architecture and then we test it. Pod, yes, pod differs from containers. Correct. See, in Kubernetes world, we call pods. Basically, pod contains containers only. But one pod, basically 90% of the case, one pod will have only one container. But one pod can have multiple containers also, like the other containers would be helping the main container. Basically, what I'm telling, let's say if I have a pod, okay, let's say if I have a pod here, this is my pod, and let's say I have a container here, one container. So this will be the ideal case. One pod will be having one container mostly. This is my pod. So in Kubernetes, we use pod, okay, pod word, and this is my container, okay. In Kubernetes world, we don't call containers, we basically call pods. Basically, one pod is equal to one container. But one pod can have multiple containers as well, where the other containers could be helping the main container. These are called helper containers. Helper containers, like data pullers or data pushers. Uh, the logs from this container needs to be pushed to somewhere, or this needed. So this could be data pullers or pushers, or this helper containers could be used as proxies. So there could be situation, one pod can have multiple containers, but in that case, the other container would be helping the main container. That's the main point. Okay. See, if you install Docker in a free version, free operating system like Ubuntu, you don't have to pay. But if you install Docker in a paid operating system like your CentOS or let's say your Red Hat, it's a paid licensing system. So Docker will not be free. You can learn it, but for commercial purpose, you have to pay. So it depends on your operating system, Hari. Any more questions, guys? Okay, so that will be all for today, guys, everyone. So thank you for attending. If you're interested, we can meet. We will meet on Tuesday on the demo workshop for our course. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. Have a great day. And this recording will be shared to you in the group. And for the folks in India, it's good night. Yeah. Thank you.